There are some concepts whose service life seem to stretch on for an eternity. While radical change may be disruptive at some points in human warfare, for instance in the gunpowder revolution which took place in the 14th through 17th centuries, prior to this, the weaponry used by the Babylonians would be at least somewhat meaningfully effective in combat against the forces of the late Roman Empire. While refinements and breakthroughs were made in material sciences, of course, the nature of war had yet to change. Centuries later, in the Inner Sphere and beyond, humanity seems to have found itself in a very similar place after the development of the Machi by the Terran hegemony in 2439. Primitive technologies scaled upwards, but there has been a hard limit seemingly to the overall effectiveness of human warfare, keeping mankind in a state of reconfiguring pre-existing technologies and designs for what is now 700 years. In that time, many designs have risen and fallen, but there are legends that have not only survived, but have thrived in this environment, becoming as indispensable as a spear in the ages before humanity turned to the ever-advancing and changing firearms it came to know in the latter centuries of development as an earthbound civilization. These platforms seem to be just as timeless as the technologies behind warfare that lasted for thousands of years, not mere decades or centuries. And in this piece, we are going to examine one of the best examples of a Battlemech which has always found a place within the armies of mankind. Its size and weight can often deceive others into viewing it as obsolete, or perhaps that is merely an oversight by other commanders. There is always a place, however, for something that embodies pure speed. That alone makes it a lethal mistake to underestimate this holdout from the Age of War. Better yet, it may be as underestimated as a single, humble, benign grasshopper. What it really is the heart of the swarm. So, without further delay, let us begin to look into one of the most legendary machines in the history of mankind, and one which has been in service for over 600 years. It is the machine that set the standard for what a reconnaissance asset would look like for human warfare from the day it was introduced forward. This small, yet decisive Battlemech is the definition for the need for speed. Let us explore Bergen Industries' mighty and everlasting Locust. Speed is the essence of war. Exploit the enemy's unpreparedness. Attack him unawares. Take an unexpected route. Sun Tzu, The Art of War. Humanity has never escaped the trap of warfare. From the battlefields of the ancient Bronze Age, where Egypt's pharaohs did battle with their Hittite counterparts across the Levant of the Middle East, to centuries later, where Alexander the Great conquered much of the known world. And this says nothing of comparable horrors and engagements, like the consequential Battle of Julu in ancient China. These are examples buried far into the past, but with time, things have not improved. The expansion of military regimes like the Roman Empire came to pass, only to be overshadowed centuries later by other new rising powers, which came to prominence across the world, from the mighty caliphates to the Mongolian Empire, to the arrival of modern kingdoms and nation-states as centuries passed. By the time of the 20th and 21st centuries, one would think that this would have come to an end. It did not, as the planet was embroiled in global spanning wars 3 times. even once mankind reached out to the stars and tread across alien worlds, with the hope of expanding across the cosmos. War followed it there, too. Colonies were built and often raided, conquered, or destroyed in the centuries of human interstellar expansion, just as they had been on ancient Terra. With the rise of the multi-system, military superpowers known as the Great Houses, and with the decline of the old Terran Alliance, a new age of war fell upon mankind. This age of war, however, was not immediately defined by an innovative reimagining of the prosecution of those wars. Battles in the 22nd, 23rd, 24th, and even the early 25th centuries would largely be recognizable to the vicious wars of the 20th and 21st centuries on Terra itself. While the involvement of spacecraft perhaps could be seen as a new vector to warfare, in truth it became simply the air power and satellite reconnaissance stand-ins for either the defenders or the attackers in these vicious conflicts. It didn't really change how things worked, not on the ground. But this pattern did not hold forever. For in the mid-25th century, the Machi, a new kind of war machine known as a Battlemech, was introduced by the Terran hegemony, the successor state to the Terran Alliance, and the empire that had grown from around humanity's homeworld. This monstrous 100-ton Goliath tore through traditional tank formations and finally altered the dynamics of war in such a way that the old methods of conflict finally gave way to these new bipedal marvels. Primitive in comparison to mechs that followed only a few years later, the Machi would not have a direct impact forever. However, many of its immediate offspring and relatives would persist throughout the ages. Mechs like the Thunderbolt and Banshee, for instance, have come to dominate the militaries of powers even hundreds of years later. Perhaps one of the most recognizable and influential mechs in history, though, emerges from this exact same time period. In the late 25th century, there were still a number of niches being competed for in the Battlemech space for dominance, and there was still a great deal of trial and error taking place regarding how machines should be configured for specific roles that they were intended for. One of the new manufacturers in this revolutionary military space, Bergen Industries, was far from established as a big competitor so far, but it was their push for a new recon asset that did indeed create a foundational and almost irreplaceable component of Inner-Sphere Light-Mech forces, and really made them a company that could never fully fade from prominence as a consequence. The LCT-1V Locust began walking off 8 production lines on the planet of Ares in 2499, and this mech would come to dominate the recon role in Inner-Sphere forces for almost 700 years from this point forwards. At first glance, its awkward, inhuman appearance would make that feel almost like an impossible feat, but it simply checked too many efficiency boxes where it needed in order to crush its competitors. What is interesting is despite its massive success, as it is one of the most produced battlemechs in all of history, it is very often misunderstood, because the Locust in its original form was never intended to take part in serious mech-on-mech engagements, even against other lights. Its purpose was instead to play a role as a fast-moving scout, which I'm sure you would have expected. But its secondary role was to take out infantry and light vehicle forces, or to strike at soft supply lines. In other words, it was explicitly meant not to tackle other hardened targets. From day one, this has created a strange mixed reputation that has followed the design. For procurement officers in the Great Houses, and eventually for the Star League Defense Forces, who understood the needs of their militaries, the Locust in its earliest form offered nothing but upsides. It was inexpensive, fast, and had a clearly defined role. Better yet, it was still better guarded than one would expect for a light mech of its small stature, and also could still be employed in more serious engagements, albeit at a high risk to the asset, which was, fortunately for the command structure, a very expendable one. All of its virtues in terms of production, ease of use, and its intended purpose within any military organization more or less let the Locust dominate its competitors early on. Going forwards, after its introduction, every mech that was designed as a scout, in essence, is put in comparison with the Locust, and for good reason. The Locust was extremely fast for its weight tier, while still being extremely cheap, and it is deceptively well armed for its role. Anything that attempted to overtake it needed to cover all of these brackets adequately, and few were up to the challenge. Because the comparisons with alternatives were not just in terms of its direct capabilities, but also had to take into account its strategic virtues as well. This ensured that the Locust could never be truly supplanted. Mechs that were cheaper didn't have nearly the same capabilities or lacked logistical support and replacement parts. Mechs that were more expensive were often too expensive to risk in the intended role the Locust occupied. It struck a perfect balance for what it was. The reality was, despite some glaring performance issues which the Locust did suffer from, such as if the Locust needs to engage a mech that is heavier than it with better armaments, it just really doesn't matter. There will always be more Locusts available, or one can be flown in, or it can just be replaced after an operation. This also fit perfectly during the era of the Star League for its time within the SLDF, as the Star League Defense Forces were more or less built on this kind of logic for their military doctrine. While the forces had been framed as a super elite, technologically sophisticated hyperforce by historical documents, the real truth is the majority of the SLDF's fighting capability came from having overwhelming material and logistical dominance over its enemies. Mechs like the Wasp, Stinger, and yes, the Locust, all fit perfectly into their striker regiments because there were always more. The loss of one meant little when the enemy was simply overwhelmed by the swarm. While this doctrine came to an end in its most maximalist way with the fall of the Star League, the destruction of the Terran hegemony, as well as the First and Second Succession Wars, it didn't become obsolete, and neither did any of the mechs available to the Inner Sphere powers that were used in this way. Countless Locust battlemechs were utterly shattered in these vicious conflicts, from the horrors of the Amer Civil War to the apocalypse of the Succession Wars. These mechs burned in the high-intensity conflict, as huge numbers of them were lost. Thankfully for the warlords of the Inner Sphere, there were always more. Even as the consequences of the total war began to take root, this state of being didn't change in proportion to the new realities of mech combat. The Inner Sphere degraded in just about every way as its industrial capabilities declined and technologies were lost. And yet the robust, reliable, and most key of all, replaceable Locust dominated the inventories of the Great Houses, periphery realms, and the dropship bays of notable mercenary units. The ability to manufacture them in relatively large numbers never vanished. The Locust emerged near the beginning of the Battlemech as a concept, and thrived in almost all conditions, both in peace and chaos, throughout humanity's rise and fall during the Star League. But its role in the events of mankind hardly ended with the horrors of the First and Second Succession Wars. A Light-Mech weighing in at 20 tons, the LCT-1V Locust, one of the most revolutionary battlemechs ever designed, is the gold standard of what a recon mech should be. First built in 2499, few machines so perfectly capture the essence of their task in the way the Locust does, especially when factoring in the simple and extremely affordable technologies that were used in its construction. To begin our exploration of the mech, let us start with its chassis. Looking at its core attributes, it has a standard gyro, cockpit, and internal structure. These were in actuality quite cutting edge at the time of the 1V's implementation. Given its limited overall tonnage, you'll be unsurprised to find that the Locust in its base form uses a standard complement of 10 heatsinks, providing no extra tonnage to cooling. This is also entirely not a problem given its weapons loadout. Past cooling. For its onboard electronics, the Locust comes with a Garrett T-10B communications package, as well as an OP-911 targeting and tracking system. Neither of these confer the Locust any bonuses. To conclude our observations so far, in terms of quirks, which are only used in the advanced rules, the Locust has an abundance of them, some of which may change throughout the eras even. The most up-to-date reference to its features in Recognition Guide 16 are that it has the narrow or low-profile quirk to help with its defense. In addition, it has the ubiquitous attribute to help with it logistically and to reflect its abundance. Then there is of course the drawback of it having no/minimal arms, for obvious reasons, and unfortunately it also has the weak legs perk. The biggest feature of the Locust is its movement value. Lacking jump jets, the Locust goes all in on engine power, when factoring in its relative size. 1/3 of the mech's overall volume is approximately taken up by its power plant. With a weight of 6 tons, the LCT-1V is powered by an LTV-160 Fusion Standard engine, allowing the Locust to achieve a maximum speed of 129 km per hour. This translates into 12 movement points in the tabletop game when the mech is at a full run. While this speed would be eclipsed by much more expensive Light-Mechs in the ages to come, for its day, and even into later eras, this level of mobility is extremely impressive, or at the very least competitive. It means the Locust has a strong chance over relatively open ground to be defended by a massive 4 modifier, while achieving its maximum speed. And in addition, it also has the ability to use defensive features to maximize the Locust's protection, or to traverse hard ground in a quick fashion. It is fast enough that it mostly doesn't need jump jets. This legendary agility and mobility has allowed the Locust to achieve enormous feats in combat situations for centuries, and it is easily its best attribute. The Locust is not heavily guarded. It kind of can't be. It's a 20-ton Battlemech, meaning that there are extreme limits put in place in terms of how heavily protected it can be. The 1V was also produced at a time before alternative armor types, or other outside protection systems were broadly available. Regardless, for its size, and I must stress, for its size, the Locust is robustly defended by material protection. This 20-ton skirmisher has a full 4 tons of standard plating, giving it 64 points of armor. This does mean that it has significantly more armor than its most common peers, the Wasp and Stinger, but it still cannot take heavy fire regardless of that fact. Still, if a 20-ton mech can take any kind of significant incoming fire, the Locust is among the only machines in common use throughout the Age of War, Star League era, and Succession Wars that has a chance of coming out on the other side scathed, but alive. This also makes it slightly more forgiving on the battlefield for pilots, but only slightly. This may surprise you to find out, but 20-ton Light-Mechs don't tend to be very heavily armed. In the case of the 1V, which was intended to deal with infantry, light vehicles, and soft, behind-enemy-line targets, its arsenal firepower is not geared towards mech-on-mech combat. Its only truly effective anti-armor weapon system, as a result, is its sole Martel medium laser. For a Light-Mech, this has an adequate range, and does reasonable damage for its weight. In fact, the standard medium laser is pound for pound one of, if not the, best firepower providers in the Inner Sphere. This sole weapon, however, is the Locust's only means of defending itself against enemy mechs in any real way. The laser is found in the center torso, right next to the 1V's ammunition. Outside of this Locust has a pair of machine guns, with one in each arm. These are great for shredding infantry and other light targets, which are the Locust's primary prey. These weapons profiles are perfectly matched for what it's intended to do. Though as an aside, machine guns can be effective against mechs under the right conditions, and can act as great crit fishers. They just have a very short range, and can't be guaranteed to be effective. It has 1 ton of ammunition, found in the center torso, as mentioned prior. I repeat this not only to clarify it, but to also give people needless anxiety over ammunition being stored in the core of the mech. Delicious. The Locust 1V secured its position by really being everything you need a recon asset to be. It's inexpensive, it's fast, it's relatively well guarded for its weight, and best of all, it can mess up enemy supply lines and soft targets. The only problem is, as mentioned in prior segments, it's not a spectacular combatant against other battlemechs. While it can hold its own against other 20-ton designs, it simply lacks the tools to defend itself against anything even 10 tons heavier than it is for the most part. While some slower enemy mechs, like the Hunchback for instance, would be imperiled quite quickly by a Locust due to key weaknesses that it suffers from, namely having no rear armor almost. Most enemy combatants can truly defend and overtake the Locust even with its speed advantage, provided their pilots don't act rashly. But even then, when used in coordination with other mechs, or even when just drawing fire, the Locust can still be extremely effective in mech-on-mech engagements. Just don't put it in situations where it must do things it was not intended to. The first alternative product variation of the Locust, the LCT-1S, hails from House Steiner originally, and began construction and deployment in 2567, almost 70 years after the introduction of the 1V. It is a minor alteration, but a significant one all the same. The attempt was clear, to replace out the anti-infantry weaponry on board in favor of harder-hitting systems that can better cope with tougher targets. The 1S only makes 2 changes. Firstly, it replaces out its machine guns for a pair of SRM-2 launchers. This does make it better at confronting other light mechs more directly, if only because it has a better range and slightly better damage. Its Achilles heel is that secondly, it drops its armor from 4 tons to 3 tons. That means that this variation of the mech, one designed to confront enemy mechs more so than infantry, has to confront enemy mechs with less overall durability for itself. You might be beginning to see where things could go wrong. Overall, it's an interesting attempt to change the math on the Locust, though as mentioned, it creates as many problems as it solves. But it does indeed pivot its engagement profile slightly. I just wouldn't want to be confronting an enemy mech in this thing, to be clear. Normally an M denotes a Marik model, but not in this case. The LCT-1M was first introduced during the Reunification War by House Davion in 2571, and it was built on the idea that some things were too innocent to survive in this world. The Davions opted to try to turn the Locust into a long-range support platform, and the 1M can do that job. It's just, to do that, they took all of the armor off of it. It has 1 ton of standard plating to protect it. As a consequence, a single medium laser hit will sever this mech's leg, for instance. This does allow for it though to carry 2 LRM-5 launchers, which have excellent engagement distances. It's just, this thing literally can't survive anything that resembles incoming fire. These can perform in an excellent way on the battlefield, if they are kept at range and use their mobility to generate significant defensive bonuses. But should anything penetrate and actually strike the mech, the odds of something catastrophic happening are extremely high. There was an initiative put forward by the SLDF in its latter days to refresh older designs and variants of battlemechs, and bring them to the highest possible standards for its premier Royal Divisions. The LCT-1VB Locust is the embodiment of this. First deployed in 2610, the Royal variant is an anomaly amongst early versions of the mech. The 1VB uses every advanced component available to the Star League at the time of its construction. It supports an endosteel internal structure. It upgrades its armor to ferrofibrous, giving it more protection while not reducing its weight. And finally, this Locust installs an XL engine, reducing its mass by a further 3 tons. Oh, and for good measure, it has double heat sinks too. This means that the 1BV saves 5 tons and maintains the same core performance as the original. It then installs 2 small pulse lasers and twin medium pulse lasers in place of the mech's machine guns. The small pulse lasers can shred infantry. The medium pulse lasers are incredibly accurate and hit hard against mechs. Oh, and it still has its standard medium laser to boot. It is better than the standard Locust in every conceivable way. It can level other light mechs and backstab even heavier mechs in an extremely effective way. It also has no ammunition weakness or dependency either, meaning it is harder to destroy and it can operate in the field for longer. Though, this is not to say that it does not have additional weaknesses. It is instantly knocked out by the loss of a side torso, and it costs literally twice as much as the original Locust. But what are a few details to ruin a perfectly good super mech, am I right? For the era, the Royal was the most sophisticated Locust ever produced, and would remain so until the Clan invasion, centuries later. In the early Succession Wars, even as technologies were bleeding away, leaving the houses impoverished in many ways, the LCT-1E was put together to really give the Locust a boost in performance and the ability to press enemy mechs. This mech is Capellan forged and is exclusively in their service. It has also been in their inventories for hundreds of years, terrorizing the rest of the Inner Sphere. First built and deployed in 2810, this particular model would become the gold standard for direct combat Locusts throughout the latter Succession Wars. It is in essence an LCT-1V, though it strips out its machine guns and ammunition and instead installs a second medium laser and 2 small lasers. All the lasers become arm-mounted as well. It is considered the best intro tech version of the mech for pure mech-on-mech or mech-on-armor fighting, being able to outgun consistently even some machines that would otherwise dominate a standard Locust. It's fast and can backstab as effectively as the Royal variant, barring the bonuses that machine has in regards to its pulse weaponry. This is the king of the intro tech Locusts. In a world without future, each moment is the end of the world. Alan Lightman. The Locust place in the late Succession Wars really only scaled with the diminished state of the entirety of human space. That is to say, it was still one of the most common sights on the battlefields of the 29th, 30th, and 31st centuries. In the low-level fighting of these later conflicts, even concluding with the more intense Fourth Succession War, the Locust was an essential and vital asset. Properly scouted enemy positions, as well as understanding enemy unit strength, is essential for any kind of success on the battlefield, and is also crucial in keeping friendly casualties to a minimum. Larger, more complex battlemechs in this war amongst the ruins were simply hard to keep in the field, and were often made up of generations of parts. Only a handful of mechs were produced each year by ever-diminishing numbers of facilities, and thus, salvage was in and of itself its own economy. A marauder in this time period, if it was in service for decades, was really the remnants of a dozen examples of the machine, not simply one mech and factory direct replacement parts. This was equally true for the Locust. except for the fact that Locusts were also still produced in relatively large numbers, meaning that there were new examples of the mech making it into the field with some frequency, and certainly at a dramatically higher rate than heavier, more powerful machines. This also meant that mechs like the Locust could often be pressed into battles it was never intended to fight, because there was just a severe lack of mechs at the time, and that meant that a mech of any sort is better than no mech at all. These conditions really continued until the 3030s and 3040s, and only changed because of several important discoveries, as well as dramatic, world-shaking events. The first big, key event was the discovery of the Helm memory core by the Grey Death Legion in 3028. This began the process of technological rediscovery across the Inner Sphere, first by the houses intent on changing the status quo, namely houses Steiner and Davion, and then by other great powers, as Comstar reluctantly began to intervene themselves, promoting controlled rediscoveries of technology amongst their would-be allies, to restore what was being rattled by the new Federated Commonwealth. The next key event would be the War of 3039, which went on to show how war had evolved since the events of the Forced Succession War. In this conflict, new mechs, as well as ones lost to the histories, began to emerge across all weight brackets and with the intention of fulfilling new roles. This created more competition for the Locust in some sense, straining the old, remarkably reliable recon asset, but not as much as you might imagine. The Locust still dominated in every way that counted. There were endless swarms of them. Their parts and suppliers were prolific around the Inner Sphere, and it was still extremely agile and fast for its tonnage and role. It was never outcompeted in what it specialized in, not truly. Others were innovating, but producers simply didn't feel the pressure to meaningfully do this with the Locust. Yet. Volumes of new production capacity was coming online in the wake of these two devastating wars, and with the restoration of industrial knowledge and know-how in the Inner Sphere, there was more than enough time and capacity to relaunch old, advanced designs, or to create new ones with the technologies that were now reappearing. Until the third and final shock that impacted the whole of the Inner Sphere: the clan invasion. The invasion was swift and brutal, crashing into multiple Inner Sphere and periphery powers, and even seeing the eventual, functional destruction of both the Oberon Confederation and the Free Rosselhaig Republic. But the grievous damage to the Inner Sphere, politically and territorially, is not the core of the problem that the Locust faced. Their production lines were not threatened, for instance, as there were so many of them. The real problem was that the Locust and other Inner Sphere light and recon assets with the clan invasion and the arrival of a new technologically sophisticated and extremely adept foe was that they were to face a crisis that they still struggle with even a century later. Inner Sphere Light-Mech technology, particularly in the area of recon assets, genuinely suffer massively without major additions to their frames to obscure them actively from clan quality weaponry, or even against clan light assets. Clan weaponry was dramatically more effective than its Star League equivalents, and especially pulse systems. Clan large and medium pulse lasers, in fact, are so precise and powerful that many Inner Sphere Light-Mechs were simply felled before they could even begin to achieve anything that resembled success in their operations. These circumstances were only made even more dire when these Light-Mechs were put into competition with their clan equivalents. Clan Light-Mechs were faster, delivered more powerful and accurate fire, and often, though not always, were even more durable. These pressures, while they did not eliminate the Locust or most other Light-Mechs in the traumatic new realities of interstellar conflict, accelerated innovation and attempts to restore viability to the recon concept. And that often meant that the Locust itself now had to compete for the very position of primacy it once possessed. Still, by 3050, there was excitement by manufacturers that they could rise to meet the challenges presented by new technology and competition. In the Free Worlds League, on Stuart, and the ill-fated planet of Gibson, new developments were put into motion using new technologies to have the best possible outcomes, and these were then passed on and sold to the Federated Commonwealth and Draconis Combine in their times of need. Within the Federated Commonwealth proper, Defiance Industries and Acner Battlemechs moved to accelerate their own production of new models in an attempt to restore what was increasingly a lost idea. Even within the borders of the crippled Capellan Confederation, efforts were put into motion to press the original plant and manufacture of the Locust for new designs and better outcomes. However, despite this excitement, and in spite of large amounts of money and effort, it'd be hard to say that much success awaited for mechs like the Locust even, in the new battlescape, even with Star League technology and years of experience. It would be many years before recon-oriented Light-Mechs as a whole, from the Inner Sphere's manufacturers, really had a chance to become as important as they had been in the centuries around the Age of War, the Star League, and even the early Succession Wars. They simply had a long shadow cast over them by the returning children of Kerensky, and by other developments in warfighting in the Inner Sphere itself. First put into production in 3004 during the Third Succession War, the Locust 3V was built in small numbers and proliferated around the Inner Sphere, with it either being manufactured in multiple states or traded to them. All the same, it is considered relatively uncommon amongst Locust variants of the time. It is more or less a standard Locust 1V, though it reduces its armor by a half-ton, while also reducing its machine gun ammunition, once more, by a half-ton. It then goes on to resituate the ammunition on board into the right torso rather than the center torso. I'm sure some people were breathing easy after that. From here, it retains its original machine guns, while putting a second medium laser into the center torso. This means it cannot stay in the field behind enemy lines quite as long while harassing enemy supply lines with its machine guns. But it is vastly superior at hunting other Light-Mechs during this era of the Succession Wars. Despite being relatively uncommon upon its initial introduction, it would continue to be operated across the Inner Sphere all the way through until the Ilclan era. Do you remember the Locust 1M? And its complete lack of armor. We talked about it just a little while ago. Well, new technology can fix its shortcomings. Or at least, the Federated Sons believed so. A revision of the old Locust 1M, the LCT-3D has almost the same loadout as the original, including, yes, its twin LRM-5 launchers and 1 ton of ammunition, albeit this time with a case for additional protection, which increases its battlefield longevity in theory. The only thing reduced in its weapons package is that it drops the medium laser to free up tonnage, making it a long-range only support mech. So, where do things change? Well, for starters, it uses endo steel in its frame to save 1 ton of weight. It then uses this, in conjunction with ferrofibrous plating, to upgrade the defense of the mech to 2.5 tons of the advanced material. This lets the mech have 44 points of protection, which is, in fact, a major upgrade over the original, though it cannot defend itself from any close-range threat that manages to catch it. Overall, it's a huge leap over the original LCT-1M, and uses the advanced technology of the day to really enhance it. Sadly, it does go extinct by the proper beginning of the Dark Age. Following in the footsteps of the 3D, the 3S is really an upgrade of the prior 1S. This Locust once more uses endosteel and ferrofibers to advance the mech as well, with it sharing the same overall structure and profile as the Locust 3D, interestingly enough. In this instance, the 3S retains its original medium laser, while upgrading its SRM-2 launchers to SRM-2 Streak launchers, and while adding a case for ammunition as well. For the Federated Commonwealth, if they were deploying light and inexpensive combinations of mechs within a lance, a 3S and a 3D would work fantastically as a pairing, if they can avoid reprisal from their enemies. The main drawback is that the 3S lacks armor for the engagement range it is meant to operate in. But Locusts are common, and Locust pilots, evidently, are replaceable. So, it really is a problem if it manages to tag its enemy. So, is it really a problem if it manages to tag its enemies with missiles before it evaporates in the wake of the enemy reprisal? I'll leave you to decide. The model that would dominate the Locust's presence in the 3050s. Exported around the Inner Sphere by the Free Worlds League, this particular Locust ended up on the front lines fighting the clan opposition. The Locust 3M, a mech designed and built by people who never fought the clans at this point, I should add, was definitely built with choices. Much like the Locust 3S and 3D, it does lean into new technologies in order to make the Battlemech more viable, and does so by installing ferrofibrous and endo steel, while reducing its overall volume of armor, this time to 3 tons. To start with, of course, the medium laser is retained with this variant. It then goes on to remove its much unloved machine guns, freeing up yet more weight. These MGs and their ammunition are then replaced by 4 small lasers, with 2 being split between each arm. This makes the mech run slightly hot, given that it still uses its standard base complement of heat sinks. These being small lasers also means that the Locust is focused on being a short-range fighter against armored targets, not soft ones. Of course, there is some other stuff too. To protect the mech further, it has a case, along with an anti-missile system. The case is there, ironically, for the AMS ammunition. Anti-missile systems can be vital in the defense, and are key to some mech's survival, but usually in the latter eras of human conflict, as a hard counter to things like Thunderbolt missiles. While not ineffective against standard missiles, they do tend to leave a bit to be desired overall for the realities of their defensive bonuses. So, in short, the 3M is very similar to the 1E, albeit with less armor and slightly more energy weaponry on board. It has an anti-missile system, and it would be the primary advanced technology Locust to be seen on the battlefield scrapping it out with clan opposition. God help those who were given them in these circumstances. Remember, an export from the Free Worlds League is not necessarily something that you can always take to the bank. Piraticia numquam muataroa. I have probably just butchered the Latin there, but what I'm really trying to say is piracy. Piracy never changes. I could feel the Marian pride of this machine flow through me for a moment there. First appearing in 3066, at the tail end of the Fedcom Civil War, the Locust 1v2 is a Marian hegemony configuration of the aforementioned Locust. It is once more essentially a 1v, only this time replacing its machine guns with 4 rocket launcher 10s. These are one-shot, dumbfire weapons, but it can do impressive damage for a single turn of fire. It retains the medium laser. This thing exists to run behind something and alpha strike it, as far as I can tell, and that can be extremely effective against some enemy mech designs, or extremely effective in general if timed correctly. The 1v2 is also fantastically cheap for the era it was produced in, using no advanced components whatsoever. The Marians, being the Roman Empire on a budget. Another product of 3066, this time from the Free Worlds League and Saurian Enterprises on Stewart. The LCT-5M was only developed and built due to the intervention of the Word of Blake, despite the fact that the League also came to procure the mech itself. Extremely expensive, and pushing boundaries well beyond what any Locust so far within the Inner Sphere prior to the LCT-5M's development. The mech most definitely flies in the face of what most people would expect. After studying the requests for the mech from the Word of Blake militia, free world's engineering teams were thoroughly impressed, and even noted some cost-saving measures built into the otherwise expensive Light-Mech. Licenses were secured shortly afterwards, and production began. So, what made this so wildly different from other Locusts, at least so far? To start with, it uses essentially almost every advanced technology available to Light-Mechs. This means that it has endosteel to start with, and 4 tons of ferrofibrous armor plating as well. It guards the mech to the maximum for its weight. It also possesses a massive Hermes 240 XL power plant, letting this new Locust reach a maximum speed of 194 kilometers per hour, or 18 movement points in the tabletop game. This is outrageous as far as performance is concerned. The only drawback is the fact that the 5M, in order to focus on a minimum bonus in terms of protection, seems to sacrifice its cooling capacity, as it only has the base 10 single heat sinks. This becomes a problem when factoring in its energy-reliant offensive package. That package being that it has a single ER medium laser mounted in the center torso, and 4 ER small lasers mounted between the 2 arms. This array of firepower is definitely intimidating when it comes to backstabbing. It just likely does not have the heat budget to reliably bring its guns to bear without facing consequences. Still, for an expensive Locust, the 5M has an abundance of virtues. Its speed alone makes it a potentially decisive participant in any fight, or when penetrating into porous enemy lines, or even when just investigating enemy positions. In the past few years, the Republic has been on a slow, steady slide towards the edge of an abyss. The catalyst for this slide was the loss of the hyperpulse generator network, and thus the loss of interstellar communications lifeblood to any star-spanning nation. During this time of trials and tribulations, we have all witnessed the best and worst that everyone, anyone, citizen or resident, peerage or proletariat, had to offer. We found greatness and frailty. We discovered new allies, new enemies, and the depth of our own resolve to take a new and stronger hand in our own lives, our futures, and our destinies. And if there was any failure, it was our failure. The failure of those of us entrusted to safeguard Devlin Stone's great legacy. An excerpt from Joan 11's final address to the Republic, as it was, October 1st, 3135. With the increased industrial capacity and technological output of the Inner Sphere in the mid-31st century, as well as with the clan invasion, it was bound that something horrifying was to happen. War accelerated once more to something that resembled mass conflicts. The weapons of mass destruction and huge sweeping assaults returned as the First Federated Commonwealth Civil War exploded, and then there was a Blakist crusade that swept over the Inner Sphere. The realms of humanity were sundered in the conflict. The very heart of the Inner Sphere, which had been the Chaos March, and then the Word Oblique Protectorate, was consumed in the flames before being reborn as the Republic of the Sphere. This new realm was headed by Devlin Stone, the man who buried the Word Oblique itself. In the aftermath of these devastating wars, and the destruction of the Second Star League, militaries of the remaining great powers were greatly regulated and subject to arms reduction treaties. Worse still, with the limited support for the military in place, and with much to be rebuilt across human space, many of these facilities were either not immediately restored or not focused on at all. It was a dark age for militarism in a sense, as Stone's peace reigned across the Inner Sphere. But that peace would have consequences. When the HPG blackout struck, it left almost every major power in the Inner Sphere flat-footed and weak. Wars broke out, nations burned, including Devlin Stone's Republic. From its ashes, a new era of war has followed it, one where a clan Star League has been born at the heart of the Inner Sphere, on Terra itself. But in all of this war and strife, what was to happen to the Locust? Some things changed, but the fundamentals largely stayed the same for this 20-ton marathon runner. With the collapse of many parts of the military industry, the Locust itself simply persisted as it did during the Succession Wars, and the prior Star League, the design still flooded markets, from the periphery to the core of the Inner Sphere. Its parts dominated whole regions. New models were still built, and often in relative scale to the production across the Inner Sphere, in great numbers. The primary operators didn't change, though who built them is a bit of a different story. In the fires of the Blakest era, Locusts were prioritized by the Word of Blake in their various forms. They had the Mariks build their own domestic models for their use, before seizing even that and building their own swarms of Locusts, using Blakist-specific technologies. This shaped the mech's output for a time, as these models dominated the 3070s and 3080s. Though in the aftermath, it appears that production has increasingly fallen back into more traditional operators' hands, notably Bergen Industries themselves, as well as the Lyran Commonwealth. With new models of increasing sophistication being put into production, often now at higher and higher costs, it can be said that the Locust has evolved out of its most traditional role even, though cheaper, older variants still dominate much of the market, if only through second-hand use and parts. In the conflicts that now rage across the frontier of these empires, the Locust's presence has been felt everywhere, from the expedition campaigns of the Marian hegemony, all the way through to the fiercest fighting between the Federated Sons and their ancient rival, the Draconis Combine. Perhaps the term "war never changes" is indeed truer than I'd given it credit for, because prior to the Reunification Wars, similar scenarios, similar battles, would have been played out, with the Locusts swarming the conflict zone for both sides. In the later stages of human history, as we understand them in the Inner Sphere, the Locust is as present as it has been for hundreds of years prior. That alone should be a testament to the engineers who first put this marvelous bug together. The Locust 5V is the first of its kind designed and built in the Blakest era of warfare. Walking off assembly lines in 3068, this devilish construction is also a product of the periphery, and would eventually see some export into the Capellan Confederation. The primary powers where it was manufactured are notably the Magistracy of Canopus and the Taurian Concordat. It is notable that it is still in service across the periphery and the Confederation, even into the Ilclan era. It very much resembles the Locust of old in much of its construction too, using mostly standardized construction methods, and much of the original 1V statistics. The only major change is that it has ferrofibrous armor, marginally increasing its protection, and that it adds double heat sinks. As far as weaponry is concerned, it has twin rocket launcher 10s, allowing it to deliver one turn of relatively high firepower for its size, and it also has twin ER medium lasers, giving it extra range in comparison to older Locusts. Overall, the 5E is a relatively successful design considering the simplicity of its construction, following in the tradition of the Locusts since their introduction. The Locust really began its journey as a machine designed to shred light targets, and in 3070, it most definitely returned to its roots. The LCT-5T replaces out its original, standard engine for an XL equivalent, and once more uses the maximum amount of ferrofibrous plating. It also doesn't bother with double heat sinks, as it frankly does not need them. So, what is to be done with its saved weight? 3 words. light machine guns. Its main means of offense is, in fact, 6 light machine guns, put into 2 array mounts. These are catastrophically violent and dangerous for infantry and light-skinned targets to deal with, though it only has a half-ton of ammunition, which is protected by a case. Normally a half-ton is plenty for a single machine gun, if not overkill, and while it won't deplete its entire stores in all likelihood in a single battle, it does mean that it can chew through ammo over a campaign within a few engagements. So, it will struggle in prolonged deployments behind enemy lines. But on the battlefield under optimal conditions, this is actually quite devastating. Beyond that, it has a single ER medium laser. The Locust 5T is quite the little devil. Another variation of the Locust emerging from the Free Worlds League, this time in 3071, in the very fires of the Blakest era, which was tearing the League apart, the Locust 6M is another energy-based design, and a totally devastating one. Arguably the most effective mech-on-mech variation of the machine, it pushes everything on board to the absolute limits of the technologies available at the time of its construction. Endosteel is used in the core frame. It also has the maximum amount of ferrofibrous plating. It even uses a small cockpit as well as an XL gyro. Double heat sinks are on board this time even. Every possible weight-saving measure seems to be applied. It even possesses an absolutely massive 8-ton, 280 XL engine, letting it run up to 226 kilometers per hour. Amusingly, it also adds in a mask, so it can run above 300 kilometers per hour for brief periods of time. 28 movement points in a single turn is bananas. For armaments, it has a pair of ER medium lasers and a single ER small laser. This is more than enough for it. Even clan mechs will struggle to contain this monster if it is used correctly. It can cover essentially an entire map in a single bound if needed. It is a superb resource for confronting enemies at the highest level, though it does have quite a high cost of production. Returning to the Steiner line of Locusts, the LCT-6S, first put into service in 3073, is in many ways a much more traditional take on the mech. It retains most of the standard features you've come to know from the Steiner line of the mechs, while using endosteel and 2.5 tons of ferrofibrous, meaning that it is more fragile this time around. It also uses the original 160 Fusion standard engine. So what changes? Well, it is intended to be a balance between the old Davion and Steiner model of the Locust. It uses twin MML3s, which can either fire LRMs or SRMs, and it has 1 ton of ammunition split between the two of them, which are usually dedicated more towards SRM ammo. After this, it has a single ER medium laser. It is an odd Battlemech, to be honest, but it is low cost, and there's nothing wrong with that. Blake's devout followers eventually demanded a Locust all their own, rather than simply draining the Free Worlds League of theirs. Unlike the League-specific models they typically procured, the Locust 5W series seems to mostly embrace a halfway point between the more advanced models and the less sophisticated ones used by other powers. Don't get me wrong, these were advanced, but they were more budget-conscious. Once again, these are notably built on Stuart, but after the League had entirely descended into Blakist control. The first to appear was the LCT-5W, which made its debut in 3076. Notably, after the Blakist era, it largely vanished, save for being used by the Blessed Order of Comstar. With their death, and the destruction of their industrial resources, these machines have gone extinct by the Ilclan era, and were functionally extinct as of the late Dark Age. Once more, it has an endosteel frame, as well as an XL engine, this time a 180 rated variant. A mask is also installed too, letting this particular Locust reach a maximum speed of 194 km per hour, or 18 movement points when the mask is engaged. It also installs light ferrofibrous, giving it functionally the same protection as regular ferrofibrous given the lighter nature of the mech. Double heatsinks are also included. As far as weaponry is concerned, it has a pair of ER medium lasers, a tag, and most importantly of all, an improved C3 computer, helping it engage in the bleakest way of warfare. Information in this case is almost literally ammunition. This mech fulfills a much more true recon and support role due to its tag and due to that C3 system. Overall, it is a very interesting design of the time, though its time is very brief. The sister design to the 5W, first produced in 3079, the Locust 5W2 is a very similar offshoot to its prior counterpart. It has almost all the same base components, such as its internal structure, engine, mask, heatsinks, and armor. The only things that change is in its equipment. The C3 is flipped over to a standard C3 slave. It retains the tag and its ER medium laser, but adds a Guardium ECM suite in order to better aid the mech in protecting itself in terms of electronic warfare. Overall, the 5W2 is very similar to the 5W, but its role is mildly changed through its gears adjustments. Another Marik model, this time built in the aftermath of the Blakest era in 3087. The Locust 5M2 is once more clearly built for engaging enemy mechs and vehicles, and doing so using advanced technologies from the Inner Sphere at the time. These were also, interestingly, produced in the aftermath of the sundering of the Marik realms themselves. Once more, it has an endosteel structure and uses ferrofibrous armor, with it only having 3 tons of it, however, this time. It also has double heatsinks on board. A large 220 XL engine is installed as well, letting it run up to 183 km per hour, or providing it with 17 movement points on the tabletop game. So, where are its virtues? It is heavily gunned for a 20-ton mech. It uses twin medium pulse lasers, with 1 in each arm, and an ER medium laser in the center torso. This is enough to backstab heavy mechs quite effectively, or to eviscerate other light machines. The only drawback this Locust has compared to its other modern peers, it's a bit lacking in armor. First produced in 3088 as the Free Worlds League succession wars were beginning to rage, the Locust 5M3 is unique for what it brings to the table. Arguably the most heavily armed Locust in existence, at least in terms of using Inner Sphere technologies, the 5M3 is almost a successor to the Flea in some senses, rather than the Locust. Endosteel is used in its primary structure. It uses a 180 XL engine and has a maximum speed of 151 km per hour. It has 3.5 tons of ferrofibrous plating, and of course, it has the base configuration of double heatsinks. So, why is it so heavily armed? Well, it has an Inner Sphere ER large laser, as well as twin ER medium lasers. This, as far as Light-Mechs goes, is actually quite a heavy arsenal, and its large laser has some meaningful range brackets to utilize too. Still the flagship product of Bergen Industries, the Locust continued to be worked on for the last 600 years by the manufacturer. Entering into the Republic era, or the early Dark Age, this did not change. By 3102 they produced and developed the LCT-7V, which was deliberately designed almost as a nostalgia variant of their end product. The 7V, you see, had been explicitly conceived to be an update rendition of the original Locust 1V, but using new sophisticated technologies that the Inner Sphere had developed over the last 6 centuries. Now, it is important to note that this mech was deployed during a low ebb of military procurement across the Inner Sphere, and at a low point of military industrial output, yet it was still considered a success in spite of this. So, what's under the hood? Well, it uses endosteel, of course, as well as a 200 light engine. Light engines are Inner Sphere power plants that are more durable than XL engines, but aren't quite as good at weight saving, but still allowing them to reduce some tonnage, just not as much as if they had a full-size XL counterpart. All the same, this engine gives the Locust the ability to reach speeds of up to 162 km per hour. or 15 movement points. In regards to protection, the 7V has 3.5 tons of heavy ferrofibrous, giving it the maximum armor value for its weight. For cooling, once again, it also has its base complement of heat sinks. So, with all of that out of the way, what's left? Well, it uses a medium X-pulse laser as its primary cannon, and this is found in the center torso, replacing the traditional 1V's medium laser. Where things get more interesting is in its replacement for the old machine guns, in that it has a pair of mag-shot Gauss rifles. While their damage is the same as the old machine guns, they have the same range as a full medium laser. This extra threat distance is significant, and gives the Locust more options for engaging its targets. Overall, the 7V is an interesting creation, and shows that the original manufacturer of the Locust still has some life left in it, trying to save on costs for their clients while updating a classic design. The sister variant of the LCT-7V, the 7V2, first produced in 3112, shares almost all of the physical features of the 7V, and only remixes its weaponry options. The X-Pulse laser is dropped in favor of a light PPC, giving the mech a long-range strike capacity that few Locusts, or even 20-ton inner sphere mechs in general, can offer. It also then installs a pair of ER small lasers for close-quarters engagements. It's an interesting remix and gives options that most Locusts just don't have access to. The latest model of the Locust as of the early Ilclan era, the LCT-7S, first built in 3128, is a wild departure from the traditional Lyran approach to the mech. Produced by Defiance Industries on Farillo, this new model is an example of a faction pushing the Locusts, technologically, to the furthest limits it's ever been taken, at least by an inner sphere power. Traditionally, the Steiner series of Locusts were missile-based, and often poorly protected and built at a low cost, much like their Davion counterparts. This seems to have changed with the 7S. First of all, it uses endosteel in its frame, as one would expect at this point. It of course has the standard package of double heatsinks as well. Again, 4 tons of ferrofibrous plating is used on board to give it the maximum volume of armor. Where things really start getting expensive is in its 240 XL engine, which is of clan quality. This means the engine is significantly more durable than an inner sphere equivalent, allowing the Locust to lose a side torso and to continue functioning for some time. It also means that the Locust can run up to 194 km per hour, or 18 movement points in the tabletop game. Overall, this is a massive upgrade to its defensive abilities, even if it's passive, even before looking into its other attributes. A case is installed as well, I should add, because the 7S uses a pair of machine guns for close quarters fighting, but the real damage output comes from its clan quality ER medium laser, which is functionally a large laser by inner sphere standards. The 7S is, for a 20-ton mech, extremely fast, durable, and meaningfully gunned. It is expensive, but the Lyrans of the time had no problem with handling such costs, though that may not be the case at the moment, unfortunately. Still, the LCT-7S is the most advanced inner sphere produced Locust ever designed, built, and put into general service. It is, in essence, the ultimate Locust. I will repay you for the years the Locusts have eaten. The Great Locust and the Young Locust, the other Locusts, and the Locust Swarm, my great army that I sent among you. The Book of Joel, 2:25. Centuries. The Locust is one of the rare breeds of machines that have arrived and dominated their intended battlefield role for literally hundreds of years, almost uninterrupted. It has a longer service history than the crossbow did amongst European militaries from the medieval era through to the Renaissance, and has had a far bigger footprint in its own time period across human space. When Bergen Industries crafted it, they had not a clue that they were making something that would last, and last, and last, because it wasn't even conceived with that type of longevity in mind. What would have been a flash in the pan became an ever-present firefly, illuminating the military history of mankind ever since. In its long service, it has been there as empires have risen and fallen. Mechwarriors have relied on these for their protection, both as recon assets to guide their more powerful mechs through the dangers of a hostile war zone, or as pilots of the mighty little things themselves, racing through open ground in heated battles across the heavens. In the various forms it has taken over the ages, they range from simple and cheap to sophisticated and costly. They have fought for the noble cause of the Star League, to defend the Inner Sphere and the clan invasion, through to the destruction of the Word of Blake. They have also served under the malicious banners of pirate warlords, greedy nobles, and the apocalyptic death cult that was the Word of Blake itself. It has known more battlefields than most other mechs could ever be thought to have participated in, and it will continue for ages yet to come. The swarm, the plague of locusts that still exist to this day, could not be exhausted by centuries of warfare, let alone the swarms that will be built in the coming decades, as war once more ravages the lands that humanity occupies. It is the very heart of such wars almost, with its endless reign and endless numbers. One may even say it is the very heart of the swarm. Quantity has a quality all its own. Thank you all for joining me here today. Before I delve into some important notes for this video, I want to start with a reminder. If you've enjoyed this content, don't forget to hit like and subscribe. It really does help get the video to more people, and I appreciate it. Also, we are only a dozen or 24 subscribers away from 40,000 subs as of me posting this video, so I really want to give a huge thank you to everyone who has supported this channel over the years. However, of those people, I want to give a massive shout out to all of the YouTube channel members who support this channel. These videos and what I do here is really only made possible because of viewers like you. Also, I did want to give a bit of insight into this video, as it was kind of a nightmare to produce. It's not really great when you get interrupted mid-script production or mid-research, as I was, like, by everything. From things in life to big Battletech announcements, this video got derailed no less than 3 times, and it was really frustrating. I do hope that it met everyone's standards, and I do hope people enjoyed it all the same. Also, I want to give a huge thank you to Jaden Morris, who created the Locust image that was used to make the thumbnail for this video, and is the Locust in the opening and closing shots. His work has been fantastic, and I'm super stoked to finally bring it to all of you, the wider audience. It is the only original piece that was made for this video in and of itself. Jaden has also finished work for the Marauder 2C video, and he is working on a piece for the upcoming Wraith video. It's going to be very cool. Now, with all of that done, what did you think of the Locust? Is there a favorite variant you have? Do you want to have one of these little monsters skittering across the tabletop more than before? Let me know in the comments section below, because I'm going to catch you all there.